Now that you're shooting video, let's talk a little bit about the field of view and what those little field of view settings will do for you. So I'm working in standard 1080p right now so that I have access to all three field of views. The three choices I have on the Hero 4 Black are wide, medium, and narrow for 1080p. Here's a look at the wide field of view. It's giving us the maximum amount of image sensor I can see without going into the whole super view concept, which will warp and distort things a little. We'll talk about super view in a minute. Here's what medium looks like. So we've cut a little bit to the center. It's a little bit more zoomed up. And then finally, here's narrow, which is zoomed up pretty dramatically compared to wide. So if I'm here at narrow, there's wide, narrow. You can see how much area you're losing when you move into narrow, but you are zooming up and you're not really losing resolution because, again, the camera itself at 1080p doesn't necessarily need all the pixels that it has. It's not already not using them all. So cropping it a little bit like that is not doing detrimental, terrible things to your resolution. One thing it is going to change is how much of the lens it's using and how much of that lens you're actually utilizing the edges. So if you think about the distortion that's coming with the fisheye style lens of the GoPro, that's super wide, that's giving it the fisheye. I mean, look at this bench. It's pretty much curved. Looks like, the Hulk got to it and just curved it a little bit. Don't just look at the bench, though. Look at the corners. See how the grass kind of curves up, the trees here. Everything is warped at the corners a little bit because that's pretty much what a wide-angle lens does. Look at what happens when we go to medium. It's not just zoomed in. The curvature is starting to go because I'm using more of the center of the lens. And the center of the lens is a little bit less fisheyed. Now when I go to narrow, I have almost no curve. I mean, that is normal. Those are straight lines right there in the edges of the frame. As you zoom in, not only are you getting closer and more zoomed in with your image, but the fisheye effect is starting to disappear. Now, don't worry. If you're not a big fan of the fisheye effect, as you can see, it is removable. So even if I'm looking at that wide shot, I've duplicated the wide shot and used a tool to get rid of the fisheye at the end. We could talk about that a little bit later on in a more advanced part of the course. But basically, you do lose a little bit of the edges, but not much. I've still got most of that bench in view, just a little bit less, but now my lines are straight. The what's called lens distortion effect has been pretty much mitigated. You can do that with photographs too in picture mode. So if you're taking picture mode and you're like, oh, these are all fisheyed, forget it, I'm not going to do that. Well, don't worry. Just center your subject as much as you can, and you can get in and work with that lens distortion effect a little bit later on to kind of manipulate it and take it out. You can do it for photos and videos, but that's your field of view concept. So you can get a little closer without having to physically move the camera, or back out a little bit without having to physically move the camera, just to fit more detail in. Now, next we'll jump in and talk a little bit about super view, which uses the lens distortion concept to your advantage. It warps and distorts things on purpose to fit more information into the frame. Let's take a look.